The night Nancy proposed to me, she got a text from her first love, begging her to come back. The next day, she took it all back. "Dave," she said, "I think it's too soon to get married." What she didn't know was that the text was from my older brother, pretending to be her ex. My brother could never stand Nancy, but he couldn't stop me from loving her. I'd loved Nancy since we were kids. It was the worst-kept secret in our whole neighborhood. Nancy knew it too. We grew up together, the classic childhood sweethearts. But she always preferred to call us childhood friends. Sweetheart was a little too intimate, I guess. For me, Nancy was the loud, passionate love of my youth, and the silent, bitter pill I swallowed as an adult. The turning point was a guy named Eric. Eric was a classmate of ours in high school, and our story played out like every cheesy teen drama. He was getting cornered by some bullies after school, and Nancy, ever the hero, stepped in to save him. After that, he started hanging out with us, walking home with us, joking around. Slowly, my walks with Nancy went from 2 people to 3, and then back to 2. Only this time, I was the one who was pushed out. Before I left, Nancy and I had a massive fight. I finally screamed at her how much I loved her. I told her I was jealous, so incredibly jealous. I told her I hated having Eric around. She just stood there, stunned, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes full of guilt and regret. "I'm sorry," she said. "I've fallen for Eric. I lost my mind. I was a twisted, bitter mess. And then I was out of her life. From sophomore year until we graduated college, Nancy and I didn't speak a word to each other. Our parents were still friends, of course. It just meant that for any family get-together, if she was there, I wasn't, and if I was there, she wasn't. The next time Nancy and I had anything to do with each other was at her parents' funeral. They'd been in an accident on a trip they took after retiring. Both of them were pulled under a truck and were gone before they even reached the hospital. I'd never seen Nancy look so broken. After paying my respects, I stopped by her on my way out. "I'm so sorry for your loss," I managed to say. After that, I was terrified she'd fall into a deep depression. So I went back to my old, shameless self, following her around like a lost puppy until we reconnected. She and Eric had broken up in their junior year of college, and his name became the one thing we silently agreed never to mention. We finally got together on the anniversary of her parents' death. I was with her while she drank herself into a stupor. When I woke up, we were in bed together, holding each other. Of course, nothing happened between 2 people that drunk. But when she woke up, she looked at me, clear-eyed, and said, "Dave, let's be together." I thought I had buried my feelings for her, but even after 8 years apart, she was still the one wall I couldn't help but run straight into. But once you hit a wall, you're supposed to turn back, right? After we got together, Nancy was amazing to me. She'd peel my shrimp and pick the spicy peppers out of my food. She remembered every single one of our anniversaries, showering me with watches and model kits. If I so much as mentioned a stomachache, she'd drop her work, deadlines be damned, and rush home from the office. The years had turned her into the perfect partner, but she was no longer the girl from my memories. The girl I loved was the one who would battle me for the last chicken wing at a family dinner, then call me a glutton while pushing the whole plate over to me. The girl I loved was the one who would boo me from the sidelines at a track meet, only to be waiting at the finish line with a bottle of water. The girl I loved was the Nancy who would always tease me until I was mad, and then immediately try to make me laugh. But she wasn't like that anymore. She was just nice to me. She never tried to get a rise out of me. She had matured so much, but I wasn't the one who was with her on that journey. Sometimes I wondered if she was this good to Eric. She was so good at peeling shrimp. Did he teach her that? My pride kept me from ever bringing up his name, but I couldn't let it go. Eric was a thorn in my side that I could never pull out. It drove me crazy that our decade-plus of friendship meant less than the 2 months she knew him. And my heart ached for the 16-year-old me who would change direction the second he saw Nancy and Eric walking together in the distance. I used to imagine scenarios where Nancy would come back and beg for me to take her back. In my daydreams, I'd coolly raise an eyebrow, tell her I don't do leftovers, and walk away. But all those years later, when she asked me to be with her, I just caved. Being with Nancy was my dream since I was a kid. But when that dream finally came true, I wasn't nearly as happy as I thought I'd be. Some moments, once they're gone, are gone forever. I wanted to break up with her, but ending something I'd held in my heart for over 20 years wasn't easy. The words were always stuck in my throat, impossible to say and impossible to swallow. I knew the truth. I loved Nancy. But the Nancy I loved was the 15-year-old girl. She wasn't the person I remembered anymore, but she was the only one who could ever be her. Should I let her go? I didn't know. A year into our relationship, Nancy proposed to me. It was her birthday. She'd thrown a party with all our mutual friends, and in front of everyone, she handed me a huge bouquet and a ring. "Dave," she said, "thank you for always being by my side." You know, she continued, "It's harder to get together with someone you know so well. But I had to tell you how I felt. Because from the moment I took your hand, I never wanted to let go." Then she asked, "Dave, will you marry me?" She said so many things about how important I was to her, but she never once said she loved me. Still, the tears came, and I couldn't stop them. As our friends cheered, Nancy gently wiped my tears away and pulled me into a deep hug. I hugged her back, my silent answer to her proposal. Neither of us posted about it, but the news of Nancy's proposal spread like wildfire on social media. My brother heard about it almost immediately. He showed up at my place that night. My brother is 5 years older than me, and he watched both me and Nancy grow up. He never really hung out with us, though. When we were kids, he thought we were childish. When we were teenagers, he thought we were emo. He never understood why I lost over 10 pounds and had dark circles under my eyes after Nancy and I stopped being friends. Back then, he loved to act like he had it all figured out, always lecturing me. "You're at that age where a breakup feels like the end of the world," he'd say. "When you're older, you'll realize the person you thought was the love of your life was actually no big deal." But 8 years later, there I was, running headfirst into that same wall. When my brother found out Nancy and I were together, he tried to talk me out of it once. He said Nancy was just lonely and I was her lifeline. He said it wasn't love. But a lifeline is the most important thing there is. If I was already the most important person to her, what was there to worry about? After that, my brother stopped trying to convince me. What's that saying? You can't reason with a fool in love. But the night she proposed, he asked me one more time, "Dave, are you sure you want to marry Nancy?" This time I hesitated. The confidence I had when I argued with him before was gone. I don't know. What happened back then is like a splinter in my mind. It just keeps poking me. "Then break up," my brother said so bluntly it took me by surprise. "Is that how you're supposed to give advice?" I said with a bitter laugh. "I haven't said a word for over a year because I wanted you to see for yourself. If you hadn't tried, she would have been the one that got away, the one you'd wonder about for the rest of your life. But now you've tried. You know it doesn't fit, so you can finally let go without any regrets." But was it really a bad fit? Nancy and I grew up together. We knew each other's habits inside and out. Our families were on the same page, and she treated me better than anyone. If you took love out of the equation, she was perfect for me. The only thing that bothered me was Eric. But how many decent people don't have an ex? Maybe I was just being dramatic. When I laid out all my anxieties for my brother, he sighed softly. He didn't mock me. Instead, his expression turned serious. "If you didn't love Nancy at all, then yes, you two would be a perfect match. The problem is, can you do that? You talk about being a good match, but from the very beginning, your feelings for each other have been completely unbalanced." I fell silent. He had perfectly articulated the source of all my confusion and pain. Seeing how torn I was, he added, "Why don't you just ask Nancy?" No point. Love isn't something you can get an answer to just by asking. But my brother had another lesson for me. He pulled out a burner phone he kept around and sent a text to Nancy. "Heard you're getting married. Congrats." I was about to laugh at how weak his message was when Nancy replied with just 2 words. "Eric?" In that instant, all the blood drained from my face. Something inside me snapped. My brother handed me the phone. "Say whatever you want." I typed and deleted. Took me a full 15 minutes to finally send the message. Posing as Eric, I asked her, Can you not get married? Nancy didn't reply, but the next morning, she was pacing back and forth under my window. I watched her from above for a long time, taking in all her anxiety, her struggle to find the right words. Finally, I called out to her like nothing was wrong. Nancy, what are you doing? Dave, can you come down? I need to talk to you. She looked up sharply, her eyes meeting mine for a second before darting away, like a kid who'd been caught doing something wrong. Okay, I said softly. I threw on some casual clothes, went downstairs, and stood in front of her. She stammered for a while before she could get a full sentence out. Dave, I think it's just too soon to get married. Our careers are just starting to take off. Maybe we should wait a little. When you proposed last night, did you forget what year it is? We're 28. Is that really too soon? I don't understand. Nancy frowned. I was drunk last night, so the bouquet and the diamond ring were just something you did because you were drunk? I thought I would lose my mind again, that I would become that twisted, bitter kid. But I didn't. I wasn't 16 anymore. In that moment, I was strangely calm. I even managed to smile. Nancy, we can just break up, you know? Break up? That's not what I mean. I told you once I took your hand, I would never let go. Then let's get married. After last night, I had no desire to marry her, but I knew she wouldn't agree. I was just saying it to be sarcastic. She was already wavering for Eric. How could she possibly hold my hand with any conviction? Sure enough, she was silent for a moment before slowly looking up at me. Dave, let's just take some time to cool off. Cool off means break up, right? I was the one who suggested it, but she wouldn't accept it. Dave, I don't want to break up, but I do. Those were the last words I said before I turned and walked away. Nancy didn't follow me. She just called out from behind, Dave, let's talk again when you've calmed down. She didn't even give me a reason for needing to cool off. She was afraid to say it, but I knew. When Nancy said cool off, she meant she didn't want to talk about marriage anymore. Not that she wanted to stop talking to me completely. But after that day, I never replied to her messages or answered her calls. She didn't come looking for me either. The next day, she flew out of the country. A business trip, she said, to the same city where Eric lived. The day she left, she sent me a text. Wait for me to come back. But Eric posted on his socials, you said you would come. The picture was of Nancy from behind, pushing a luggage cart. The jacket she was wearing was the one I had given her for her birthday just a few days earlier. I didn't have Eric's number, but when my best friend from high school, Ben, showed me the post, I didn't have much of a reaction. I just glanced at it and said calmly, that's nice. Don't pretend to be the bigger person in front of me. You're gonna make yourself sick. Come on, let's trash talk her together. And so, Ben spent the next 3 hours absolutely roasting Nancy. He didn't repeat a single insult. By the end of it, I was laughing, leaning on his shoulder with my arm around him. Well, I guess for your sake, there's no way Nancy and I could ever get back together now. It would be pretty awkward for you to be my best man after all this. I used to put Nancy on a pedestal second only to my family. But over the years, that had changed. Ben was far more important to me than she was. Back when Nancy and I had our falling out, I didn't have many friends at school. Ben was the one who stepped into my life. He ate with me, played basketball with me, studied at the library with me. He did all the things Nancy used to do with me. I couldn't get over Nancy right away, but with him around, I didn't completely fall apart. Just as I could never completely let go of Nancy, I would never forget how good Ben had been to me. My 16th year, for all its highs and lows, was an indispensable part of my life. And I was so lucky that he had been by my side through it all. Ben threw his arm around me with a grin. Looks like I'm gonna have to take responsibility for you now, he said, sounding like a big brother. By take responsibility, he meant he was going to set me up. That night, he threw a singles party for me and invited every eligible single woman from his office. All the best catches from my department are here. Take your pick. The way he said it, you'd think he was a king showing off his conquered lands. I put my head in my hands. Ben, I literally just broke up with someone. Exactly. That's why you need a distraction. I'm not looking to date right now, and it's not fair to mess with people's feelings. I tried to reason with him. Any rebound relationship is either cheating on your ex or using someone new. It's just a scummy thing to do. But I don't know what kind of sales pitch Ben gave them, because a few of the women came over one by one to toast me and ask for my number. I dodged them as best I could and was about to sneak out when Ben just created a group chat on the spot and added me to it. The crazy part was all the women in the group immediately and dutifully changed their chat names to Bachelorette 1, Bachelorette 2, and so on. Ben, you can't just use your management position to pimp me out like this. Even crazier, Ben snapped a few pictures of the women talking to me, posted them to his socials, and captioned it, "Treating my boy to something good tonight." I knew he was just trying to get a rise out of Nancy, but someone who doesn't have me in her heart wouldn't read into it anyway. Besides, Nancy was probably busy catching up with an old friend. She wouldn't have time to be on her phone. I knew that better than anyone, but the moment I saw Ben's post, I couldn't help but picture how Nancy might react. It's hard to just let go of someone you've loved for 20 years. Even though I had no intention of starting a new relationship anytime soon, I put my bag down and sat back in my seat. Right now, being alone was the last thing I needed. Half an hour after Ben's post went up, Nancy hadn't reacted at all, but someone else showed up at the address from the post. The moment the private room door was thrown open, I froze for a second. Subconsciously, I was still hoping to see Nancy rushing toward me, but she had never rushed for me, maybe because she was so sure I loved her. The person who burst in was Ben's little sister, Karina. She did not look happy. In fact, she looked dead serious. "Dave, we're leaving." She didn't bother with hellos. She just grabbed my wrist and started pulling me out of the room. Ben stood up and blocked our path, raising an eyebrow at her. "Karina, what's your problem?" Karina had always been the obedient younger sister, but for the first time, she shot back at him. "Ben, can you not push your lifestyle onto Dave?" "What's wrong with my lifestyle? I'm happy, that's all that matters. What's it to you?" Ben had a very open-minded view of love. He never shed a tear for a woman, though he had no problem drooling on one's arm in his sleep. Most of his exes weren't exactly role models, but the people he invited tonight were his colleagues, people whose character he vouched for. He wouldn't throw me to the wolves. Compared to him, I was a total lightweight. I couldn't handle a woman who was too wild. But Karina was labeling all the women her brother introduced me to as bad news, stepping up to defend my honor. I watched the siblings bicker with a smile, feeling like I was back in high school. Back then, I used to go over to Ben's house on weekends to do homework. Karina, who was only in middle school, was completely under her brother's thumb, constantly being sent on errands. Ben was smart enough to tutor her, but he had a short fuse and would blow up at the smallest thing, so they were always fighting. Eventually, the task of tutoring Karina fell to me. Karina was smart and easy to teach. She loved calling me Dave, just a sweet, likable kid. As she got older, she dropped the formal tone and just called me Dave. But we grew even closer, our bond as strong as the one I had with her brother. They were both my best friends, and they were both trying their best to look out for me. It was hard not to be moved, even as I found the situation amusing. I placed my other hand on Karina's wrist, signaling for her to let go. "Your brother and I are adults," I told her gently. "We know what we're doing, and these are his colleagues, not bad people. My brother said he was going to find you a girlfriend." Karina's eyes were fixed on me, intense. I was about to shake my head and say I wasn't in a hurry when she continued, "If they're an option, what about me? Am I?" I'd had a few drinks, but I wasn't drunk. Still, Karina's words hit me like a ton of bricks, and my brain short-circuited for a second. Ben was the first to react. "No way, Karina. You have a crush on Dave?" "Yes. I've liked Dave for a long time," she answered without hesitation, her eyes never leaving my face. Her gaze was soft, full of affection, and my heart skipped a beat. I had always seen her as a kid, even though she had already graduated from college. To me, she was still the same girl from years ago, sometimes sweet and obedient, sometimes playful and mischievous. It wasn't just me either. Ben wouldn't be able to accept this, right? Ben did raise his voice at Karina, but what he said was, "Then what were you waiting for? If you had told me sooner, I would have helped you steal him away ages ago." "Karina, who had been ready to fight her brother, froze when she heard him. She stared at him, and I did too. So did all of Ben's female colleagues, their eyes now fixed on the three of us. Ben turned to me. You know my sister inside and out, right? I used to think she liked girls, since she hasn't had a boyfriend for so many years. Turns out she was just waiting for you. It was true. Ben and I had actually discussed the possibility that Karina might be gay. He had read a bunch of novels and real-life stories about same-sex couples and told me, Dave, man, that's a tough road. If Karina really does like girls, we have to support her. I nodded very seriously, promising to always stand by them. And now it turns out I was the reason Karina had been single all this time? I turned my head in a daze, my eyes meeting Karina's. She looked at me again, her expression earnest and gentle. Dave, I've liked you for a very long time, but I knew I couldn't confess until I got into college. So I just studied as hard as I could to catch up to you. But by the time I finally worked up the courage, you had gotten back in touch with Nancy. I don't want to wait anymore, but I've always seen you as a little sister. I've never thought about you that way. Then start thinking about it now. Unless you plan on dying alone, I am absolutely the most suitable person for you. Dave, I will be good to you for the rest of my life, Karina declared, and I knew she meant it. Being confessed to by a good friend, it's impossible not to be moved. But like Nancy once said, the closer you are as friends, the harder it is to be together. And until I had completely let go of Nancy, I couldn't just take Karina's hand. I was trying to figure out how to gently turn her down when Ben hit me with a soul-crushing question. If you were set up on a blind date with someone who had the same qualities as my sister, would you be willing to get to know her? Now, be honest. Yes. I frowned and looked at Karina, thinking her over from head to toe, inside and out. I honestly couldn't shake my head no. I had watched Karina grow up. Her upbringing and character were guaranteed. She was a graduate student at one of the top universities in the country, with a bright future ahead of her. And even setting all that aside, with a face like hers, there had to be a line of guys who had fallen for her at first sight. Karina was, for all intents and purposes, perfect. Instead of trying to find some fault in her, it was better to just be honest. Logically speaking, Nancy wasn't the only one who was a good match for me. Karina might even be better. It was just that, emotionally, I couldn't pivot to Karina so suddenly. Ben snapped his fingers, a huge matchmaker's grin on his face. Then you two can start getting to know each other again. From scratch. Okay. Under Karina's intense gaze, I finally agreed. You have to move forward in life. I decided to give her, and myself, a chance to start over. I didn't immediately make things official with Karina. I just agreed to let her pursue me. Things like going out to eat together, shopping, and seeing movies. Karina never rushed me. She gave me plenty of freedom and space. She said she'd waited for me for over a decade. She didn't mind waiting a little longer, as long as she had a ticket in the love line. I'm 4 years older than Karina. When we were teenagers, that age gap felt like a chasm. But now, 4 years is nothing. Falling for Karina was the easiest thing in the world, because she was incredible, and she only had eyes for me. Nancy's business trip was turning into a long one. She was gone for over 3 months. About 2 weeks into her trip, Ben heard from some other high school friends that Eric had cancer. Late-stage bone cancer, apparently. That night, for the first time since we broke up, I replied to one of Nancy's messages. I opened our chat but didn't scroll up. I just replied to her most recent text. She had written, "It's going to take some more time to wrap things up here. I'll definitely be back for your birthday." I replied, "It's fine. Focus on your work." I didn't like Eric, but it was a harsh reminder of how unpredictable life is. In the final days of his life, there was no reason for Nancy to be distracted by me. If she needed peace of mind, I could give her that. When Ben found out, he called me a saint. Karina, on the other hand, took my side. Who cares? Let her think that. Then when she comes back, bam! I've already swooped in and won. How pissed would she be? God, that feels good just thinking about it. Ben's eyes lit up, and he and Karina high-fived. I'm not deaf. You don't have to plot so loudly. I just shook my head, watching the happy siblings. To be honest, that thought hadn't crossed my mind at all. The idea of keeping Nancy on the hook just to deliver a fatal blow when she returned, it was pointless. The story between her and me was over the day after her birthday. Wanting to see her regretful and in pain is just a sign that you still care. And I didn't want to care about her anymore. As expected, Nancy didn't make it back for my birthday. Not that I was expecting her to. The day before my birthday, Karina and I flew to the mountains to see the snow. The snow was heavy that day, blanketing our shoulders in white. A young couple walking near us was playing in the snow, whispering cheesy, romantic things to each other. The girl said, "We've already shared a snowstorm, so I guess that counts as growing old together." The guy, moved, pulled her into a hug, saying something about never regretting their love. Even in the dead of winter, the air was full of youthful energy. I was thinking about how great it is to be young when it belatedly hit me that Karina was their age. The scenery was perfect. It was the perfect time for a confession. Caught up in the atmosphere, I felt a little flicker of anticipation. I thought it would be hard to get over Nancy, but after only 3 months, my heart was slowly making room for Karina. Her confession in that private room that night was like a switch had been flipped, giving me permission to love her. Once that switch was on, loving her felt like an instinct. When I was with her, I finally felt truly loved. Nancy had been good to me in the past, but it always felt a bit forced, not as pure as what I had with Karina. "Dave," Karina whispered in my ear, "we're not just going to see the winter snow. We're going to see the spring flowers, visit every beautiful place, and spend the rest of our lives together. That's what it means to grow old together, and you're the only one I want to do that with." I already knew how she felt, but hearing those words, I couldn't stop my eyes from welling up. To keep her from teasing me, I forced down the tears that were about to fall and curved my lips into a smile. "Every beautiful place? The world's a big place, you know. We'll never see it all. Then that just gives me an excuse to find you in the next life," she said. Her sweet talk was even cheesier than that girl's, but I was a total sucker for it. The truth is, ever since I was 16, one of my birthday wishes was always for Ben and Karina. I'd wish for them to be safe, happy, and for all their dreams to come true. This year, I gave my wish to Karina and let her make it herself. As I blew out the candles, Karina and I slowly opened our eyes, our gazes locking in an instant. I spoke first. "What did you wish for? Won't it not come true if you say it?" Karina hesitated, looking a little shy. I coaxed her, "If you're sincere, it'll come true. What does saying it have to do with anything?" I thought she'd say something about wanting to be with me, and then I could swoop in and make her wish come true. But her wish was so simple and pure. "I wish for you to always be safe and healthy." As I was touched by her words, she smiled and added, "I was going to wish for us to be together, but I think I'm close to making that happen on my own. No need to bother the gods. Do you want to know what I wished for? I wished that you would be the one to spend every birthday with me from now on." I spoke softly, my cheeks slowly turning red. Getting together with Karina was the most natural thing in the world. I was just wishing for that to be extended a little bit, to be with her forever. When Karina and I got together, we had the blessings of all our friends and family. My parents said, "We remember Karina from when she used to come over. She seems like a great kid. We were worried you wouldn't be able to move on. Now we can finally relax." My brother said, "You could get married tomorrow for all I care." Ben just hooked his arms around both of ours, cackling like he'd reached the pinnacle of his life. That's when I realized just how bad my last relationship had looked to them. I had always prided myself on being clear-headed, but it wasn't until I was truly loved that I understood I had just been fooling myself all along. Never again. No more deluding myself, and no more unfaithful lovers. Nancy and I had mutual friends, but at the end of the day, they were her friends first. After we broke up, I barely talked to them. That, combined with the fact that I rarely post on social media, meant that Nancy had no idea Karina and I were together. She just kept feeding me empty promises. She said headquarters was changing her business trip to a year-long transfer, and that we would get married as soon as she got back. She said she couldn't be with me for my birthday this year, but next year she would take time off to go on a trip with me. She said once she had enough experience, She'd start her own business and build the best possible future for us. I usually didn't reply when she went on like this. On the rare occasion I did open her chat, I'd just send back a generic "Have you eaten?" or "Off work yet?" Nancy must have noticed how cold I was being, but there was nothing she could do, because she couldn't let go of Eric. A few times, she said she was coming back to see me, but then she'd get tied up with work at the last minute. Like for my birthday, she had sent me a screenshot of her flight confirmation weeks in advance, but then she bailed. That day, Eric posted a video of Nancy playing guitar and singing A Little Happiness to him. Ben sent me the video right after Karina and I had made things official. I felt nothing watching it. I wouldn't have gotten together with Karina if I hadn't completely let go of Nancy. Karina, on the other hand, insisted she sang better than Nancy and spent the whole night singing to me. All these years later, I'd finally made peace with it all, with Nancy and with Eric. 6 months after we started dating, Karina finished her master's degree. I was there at her graduation ceremony, along with her family. I watched from the audience as she, dressed in her cap and gown and holding a bouquet, walked toward me. I couldn't help but get emotional. As she made her way to me, it was like I was watching that mischievous little girl grow up all over again. Now, she was grown up enough to shelter me from the storm. She opened her arms to me, and I stood up to meet her, burying my head in her embrace. "Congratulations on graduating," I said. She replied, "Marry me, Dave." Without any hesitation, I glanced at my watch, then looked up at her and smiled. "Is there still time to go home and get our birth certificates?" "Of course." Karina's voice was bright, her eyes crinkling with a smile, just like the mischievous girl I first met. She had grown up, but in a way she hadn't. Either way, she had become this soft, irreplaceable part of my heart. She and Ben had become more important to me than Nancy long ago. I just hadn't realized it then. Hadn't considered the possibility of being with her. Once I did, loving her became as easy as breathing. While Karina and I were planning our wedding, Nancy came back. She looked exhausted. When I went downstairs to meet her, she threw her arms around me, murmuring my name. "Dave, Dave, I'm back." Ben had already told me that Eric had passed away a week ago. I gently pushed away from her embrace and looked at her calmly. "Nancy, I'm sorry for your loss." "Dave?" Nancy was shocked, and a flicker of fear crossed her eyes. You knew? Then why didn't you ask me? I told you we broke up. Besides, I had sworn to myself when I was 16 that I would never ask her that stupid question again. The one where she had to choose between me and Eric. I didn't agree to it. I said we would get married when I got back. "Dave, I'm back now. I'm here. I missed you so much this past year, but you never answered my video calls. I really, really missed you." Nancy kept going on about how much she missed me, her expression screaming how much she cared, but I cut her off. "Nancy, I'm married." Stunned into silence, Nancy just stared at me for a long time, then shook her head, enunciating each word. "That's impossible. Do you know Karina, Ben's sister? We got our marriage license 2 months ago. Is this because I went to take care of Eric? Are you trying to get revenge on me?" "Dave, Eric was dying. Did you really have to compete with him over everything?" Nancy's face was a mixture of disbelief and anger. It was the first time she had been angry with me in years. For a moment, I couldn't tell if it was more because of me or more because of Eric. If I really wanted to compete with him, I would have used it as leverage the day after you left and forced you to come back. But you were gone for almost a year. Did I ever say anything to you? In fact, when I found out Eric was sick, I even replied to your message because I didn't want you to be worried about me being upset while you were taking care of him. So, you do still care about me, don't you? And you were lying about being married, right? Nancy's expression softened, and she reached for my hand. I pulled away before she could touch me and met her gaze directly. "Nancy, I don't hate you. I didn't even hate her when she took back her proposal. At the time, what I felt was more like relief. I couldn't forget the bitterness of those teenage years, but I also couldn't bring myself to cut ties with her. Her words that day made the decision for me. They cut through all the tangled emotions and worries that had trapped me, and it was like I was a person walking in the dark who finally saw the light. I didn't hate her, so I gave Eric the only bit of kindness I had to offer. I kept her calm for him, so she could be by his side without worry as he lived out his final days. After I told her all this, she was still shaking her head and saying she didn't believe me, but the light in her eyes was starting to fade. She said weakly, "I told you that you were the most important person to me. From the moment I decided to be with you, there was no way I would ever get back with Eric. The night I proposed to you, Zoe asked me if I'd been in touch with Eric. That's when she told me he was sick. Eric's parents always favored his brother. They never had a good relationship. When they found out his illness was terminal, they basically wrote him off as dead and never once went to see him. Eric is incredibly stubborn. When he decided to drop everything and go abroad, he cut off all contact with me. He wouldn't have reached out unless he was at his absolute breaking point. That night, he sent me that text, asking me if I could not get married. I cut off her explanation. I sent that text, I said quietly. Nancy's expression shifted from confusion to dawning realization. Then she murmured, "No wonder." When I called back the next day, no one answered. "Dave, if you wanted to know something, you could have just asked me. I would have always chosen you. You already gave me my answer that day, downstairs from my apartment. Or maybe she had already given me my answer when we were 16. Dave, Eric's situation was just so awful. He was so thin, he was practically a skeleton. I was just going to visit him and then come back. But he was in such a pitiful state, I couldn't bring myself to say I was leaving. So I applied for a transfer to the branch office there so I could work and take care of him at the same time. I wasn't lying to you. I really was working over there. I believe you. But it doesn't have anything to do with me anymore. The truth is, Nancy and I missed our chance long before that. Was it when I saw her pacing in front of my building that I no longer wanted to marry her? No. It was the moment my brother asked me if I was sure I wanted to marry her. I never knew how to describe my feelings for Nancy, but seeing her again now, a metaphor finally came to mind. You know, to me, you're like a movie with a terrible ending. The first half was incredible, captivated me, and I was completely invested in it. But then it started to drag. It got boring. It was tasteless, but I couldn't bring myself to just turn it off. And just as I was debating whether to stop watching, someone unplugged the TV for me. But I didn't feel regret. I felt clarity, and I was able to move on and start fresh very quickly. So I don't blame you for going to Eric. In fact, I'm glad you did. No, that's not it. We were so good together. How could you have wanted to give up on me back then? Dave, you say you don't hate me, but you're just saying these things to hurt me. I really am married. If I hadn't moved on from you, how could I have walked into City Hall with someone else? Just before Nancy completely lost control, Karina arrived to pick me up. A month after we got our marriage license, Karina got pregnant. Today, we had an appointment for a prenatal checkup. Karina walked briskly between us, then turned to me with a gentle smile. "It's windy out here. Why were you waiting for me outside? Let's go." She acted as if Nancy was nothing but air. Okay. I took Karina's hand, then turned my head to give Nancy a polite smile. "We have a doctor's appointment and we're kind of running late, so we won't invite you up." An appointment? Karina wasn't showing yet, but Nancy's eyes drifted down to her stomach, and she took an involuntary step back. She believed me. As I got into the car, Nancy was still standing there, frozen like a statue. This time, I was the one who left first. Karina didn't ask me a single thing about Nancy. She just took my cold hand in hers, her eyes full of sympathy. "Look at you, your hands are freezing." After that day, Nancy never contacted me again. But she came to my wedding. She sat at a table in the farthest corner. When I was making the rounds toasting guests, our paths inevitably crossed. From the moment he found out Nancy was there, Ben was worried she would get drunk and cause a scene. But she didn't. She drank a lot, and her face was flushed, her eyes red. Nancy's words of congratulations were lost in the noise of the reception. I couldn't hear what she said. After we finished the toasts, Karina told me, "Nancy wished us a lifetime of happiness together." I smiled faintly and nodded. I figured, a lifetime of happiness. We would have that.